Hello and welcome. I'm Ejaz Haider and you're watching Indus Special. Our top story today is about Jammu and Kashmir, the region which we describe in Pakistan as occupied by the Indian Army. The Indian security forces crackdown on protesters continues and reports suggest that at least 35 people have been killed in the past 6 days. The state is without representation since the BJP pulled out of a coalition government with People's Democratic Party, a state party headed by former Chief Minister Mehbooba Mufti. Following that decision by the BJP, PDP reached out to its political rivals, including the National Conference and the Congress. Mufti claimed that in addition to PDP's 29 legislators in the 87-member assembly, she had the support of the 15 legislators from National Conference and 12 from the Congress. At the same time, Sajjad Lone of People's Conference then posted a letter to Governor Satyapal Malik on Twitter claiming that he could form the government and had the support of the BJP. Malik, however, chose to dissolve the assembly, fearing that PDP, NC and the Congress would manage to form a government in a show of numbers. Is this the BJP's ploy to have governors rule in the state so the protests can be dealt with through executive decrees? We speak on Kashmir and Pakistan-India relations with former Foreign Minister Sartaj Aziz, Anuradha Bhasin, Executive Editor, Kashmir Times, Naima Majur, a peace activist, and Muhammad Faisal, a journalist who works at TRT World. So let's kick off with Sartaj Saab. Thank you so much for joining the program, Minister Aziz. How do you look at the situation in Jammu and Kashmir and also look at Pakistan-India relations, especially in the backdrop of the recent initiative Pakistan took with reference to Kartarpur Sahib and the refusal by the Indian leaders to attend the ceremony?
Obviously, the situation in Kashmir is extremely grave, and particularly the ground situation and the very continuous human rights violation that's been going on since 2016 after Burhan Wani Shaheed was assassinated. The whole issue is becoming more serious because while the ground situation is deteriorating, India refuses to recognize that it's an issue that requires serious discussions. Pakistan, of course, has been constantly insisting that all issues have to be resolved through dialogue, and India has taken this very strange plea that unless terrorism is ended, how can dialogue begin? Now, there is a very serious paradox here because in the 60s and 70s, India was a very ardent supporter of freedom movements and movement for the right of self-determination and the UN welfare. They constantly raised this issue. Now, when Kashmiris are protesting for their right of self-determination, as promised to them by the United Nations, India calls it terrorism. And on top of that, since this terrorism is only sponsored from across the border, although they know very well that the bulk of people is there. There may be, initially there was some support here and there from people who went from here, but I think that is now almost ceased totally. It was in the 90s perhaps that happened. So now, not dealing with the root causes of the problem, which is the protest of the people for their right to self-determination, calling it terrorism also, paradoxically, blocks all opportunities to find some solution. If you recall, in the 90s, in the 99 after the Lahore process, we were engaged in very serious discussion of options under which Kashmir could be resolved, and sometime it appeared that we could see some solution. And of course, under Musharraf, also some efforts were made. So once you begin dialogue, even the more difficult issues ultimately can be resolved. But
Okay.
India is not responding to these overtures and even suspended dialogue. First you stop terrorism and then we'll talk. So now we have a very serious stalemate. Pakistan adopted the right structure that we need continuous dialogue, we need serious discussions on this issue so that you can resolve the Kashmir issue in accordance with the wishes of the Kashmiri people. So it's a very grave situation. The international community has now started taking interest. The UN Human Rights Commission recently documented all the violations.
Yes, a report that was rejected by Delhi.
Yeah, I know, but it is a UN report and very authentic. And similarly, in many other places, including UK and Norway, people are now taking notice of this issue and seeking resolution. So I do hope, and this gesture that Pakistan made in the opening of the Kartarpur corridor is a very good opportunity to show some positive response and say, okay, we'll begin dialogue on some flatty issue.
Okay, stay with me, Minister Aziz. Let me just go to Ms. Bhasin here. Ms. Bhasin, you are obviously reporting these events from the ground every day. Just give us a sense of how the current BJP government is different from the time that late Mr. Vajpayee talked about a solution to Kashmir, a reach out based on what he said insaniyat, on humanity. Do you see a clear difference between the BJP's approach then and now with Prime Minister Modi in the driver's seat?
I don't. At one level, yes, the approach is very different. At another, the approach did stem from its basic, the BJP's basic ideology, which is Hindutva. And where Kashmir in that narrative is always seen with a lot of contempt and condensation. But with Vajpayee, I think that time the global situation was also a little different. He was somebody, he was heading a government which was in coalition, and there were several pressures on him, global pressures within the country to resolve Kashmir within the subcontinent, to resolve India-Pakistan issue and Kashmir. There may have been some reluctance, but he did make that effort. Nonetheless, but this government, yes, at the other level that I say there is a lot of difference, is because this is a completely RSS-controlled government, which we've never had anywhere in the last 7 decades. This is the first time that we have a totally Hindutva-inspired government, a government that whose a party whose politics flourishes with anti-Kashmiri rhetoric and Pakistan bashing. And by nature and by choice, they would not want resolution of any kind of issues with Pakistan or resolution of the Kashmir dispute. Nonetheless, if we see the past 4 years, certain gestures have been made on and off, but there hasn't been much seriousness. Now, it's important to understand where are these gestures coming from and where is the need to show these gestures. Is it just politicking to kind of show that, we are magnanimous, but they are not reciprocating? It's a very convenient tool to be used for vote bank politics, especially among the the Hindu right-wing constituency. And right now that I see the Kartarpur border opening, on the one hand, I mean, of course, the initiative came from Pakistan, but had it not been for the Indian government to reciprocate, it would not have opened. So,
but on that point, Ms. Bhasin, on that point, because we did a program on Kartarpur Sahib last week, and the sense that I was given by my Indian participants was that Delhi ultimately realized that if it did not reciprocate this gesture, it would come across as custard, and its own Sikh community would be greatly disappointed. Do you agree with that, or do you think this reciprocity came simply because Delhi thought that, well, this is a good initiative and let's go with it?
It's very difficult to gauge the mind of a completely RSS-inspired government. But that is a possibility. Elections around the corner. They're also looking at Punjab for, they haven't fared very well in Punjab, and they want to create a mark there. So, in all likelihood, that might have been one of the reasons that they went ahead with they reciprocated. But the other is probably also, I feel, with are there certain global pressures, certain changes in the global politics, which is necessitating reciprocation of such steps. But at the same time, you don't hear leaders, and I would say on both sides of the borders, more on India this time, that there is no seriousness, or there is no one line that they are speaking in. So they keep oscillating between the two positions of peaceful overtures and hawkishness.
Okay.
And
Now, this is a very interesting observation, Ms. Bhasin, because let me just go back to Minister Aziz on this. Because in the previous government, he obviously dealt with these issues as our front person. Minister Aziz, Ms. Bhasin is saying some very interesting things with reference to the RSS grounding of this government, and also the fact that while it has tried to take certain initiatives, it has come across as mercurial in terms of taking a step forward and then two steps backwards. Did you face the same problem when you were dealing as the advisor on foreign affairs to then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif?
Yes, I think there was a visible change after Manmohan Singh, where the relationship was far better, and even during this tenure, we had a visit from Sushma Swaraj in December 2015 at the time of Heart of Asia conference,
Correct.
where we agreed to resume the dialogue.
Yes.
But I think overall it's correct that after Modi's coming, there was a basic realization, a preference that anti-Pakistan, anti-Islam, anti-Muslim policies will get votes for us in the country. And so that was a very important factor, and that's why I think before elections, anti-Pakistan rhetoric goes up. And LOC, which after 2013, after 2003 agreement has remained peaceful, has constantly been unquiet and very disturbed, and a lot of firing and lot of things. The third factor, which I think is very unfortunate, that the Indian media has persistently portrayed Pakistan and its activities and whatever they are doing in a very negative light. And whenever I watch Indian television channels, I find that the intensity of the feelings and hostility towards Pakistan is so strong, unjustifiably strong, that anything positive that anybody says suddenly draws a very strange reaction. So it is now, and I think this has been deliberately done so that their policies are not criticized, anti-Pakistan policies are not criticized within the country. And there are voices here and there which say, one should resolve issues, but I think on the whole, this has been a very unfortunate fact which prevents any serious efforts at dialogue and finding some solutions. The fourth factor, of course, is, as just pointed out, that Prime Minister Modi thinks that by following this policy, they'll keep Pakistan under pressure, they will isolate Pakistan internationally, they will damage their economy by keeping the tensions high and defense expenses high. So there is a very deliberate kind of plan.
So, Minister Aziz, do you think that, of course, we can't predict, but do you think if the BJP is returned to power, that the policy, this particular policy, will continue, or do you think once they are in the driver's seat after the national elections, that they would try and sort of tweak this policy or begin to engage Pakistan more constructively?
My feeling, one should hope that they will change, but the reason for which it will change perhaps would be the ground situation in Kashmir. Okay. It has been very tense, and from a sort of human rights perspective and general, political perspective, everybody is conscious of the fact that the kind of killings that have been going on and human rights violations have been going on are now being noticed everywhere. So they have to find some solution. And if the dialogue, resumption of dialogue would quieten down things in the ground situation in Kashmir, that may be one temptation.
Okay.
So these are the factors which I hope will bring about something.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sartaj Sahab. Our former Foreign Minister, Sartaj Aziz, was speaking to us on this. Let me quickly go back to Ms. Bhasin on something that Mr. Aziz said, and that is about media management. We have heard over the last 2 years, in fact, increasingly from our friends, journalist friends in India, that the BJP government tries to manage the media, and in fact, the interviews with Prime Minister Modi are choreographed. Have you faced the same kind of pressure as the executive editor of Kashmir Times? Would you agree with that, or do you think this is more paranoia than reality?
I would totally believe them. In fact, Kashmir press in Kashmir has been facing, much more for a much longer time, much before Modi's government came into power. I think for the last 1 decade, New Delhi's attitude towards media, free media in Kashmir changed a great deal after the peace process broke down. And there have been attempts to control and co-opt the local media here in various ways. And earlier, if it was subtle ways like, stopping the advertisements because there's a lot of reliance on the government ads, or stopping flow of information. Now these have become much more brazen. Internet is banned for several days. Newspapers are banned for several days. Curfews will be imposed, and the media persons are not given curfew passes to operate. No publications come out. No publications came out in 2013. No publications came out in 2016 for 2-3 weeks. 1 or 2 newspapers were banned. And no particular, explanation was given other than, they are just publishing objectionable material, without actually pinpointing what were the objectionable contents.
Okay.
So
Ms. Bhasin, thank you so much. This is all the time we have right now. I'm really grateful that you were on the program and you gave us the situation on the ground also and how the media is being managed by the current BJP government. We're going to take a short break. The other end of the break, we'll continue with the top story with 2 more panelists. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Indus Special and to our top story with reference to Jammu and Kashmir, which we refer to as occupied Kashmir. We were earlier talking to Anuradha Bhasin and former Foreign Minister Sartaj Aziz with reference to the ground situation, the repression, and also why there was this manipulation of the assembly, which currently stands dissolved, and there was a sense that perhaps the state will go for fresh elections, but it appears that that might not be the case in the near future, and that Delhi wants to essentially rule the state through executive decree. And we now have Naeema Majur, who's a peace activist, and Mohammad Faisal, a Kashmiri journalist who works at TRT World. Thank you to both of you. Let me just go to Ms. Majur. Ms. Majur, give us a sense of the ground situation. There have been killings in the last 6-7 days. The assembly stands dissolved. What exactly is the game plan here?
Bad to worse day by day, and every day you can see 10-12 killings of these young boys as old as 12 years, 14 years, 16 years old. And because of the repression, suppression, and the things which are going on for the last 3 years, the boys have been pushed to the wall, and they don't see any chance to get peace, to get their aspirations met. So that's why the ground situation is very bad, and the government of India is not in any sense thinking about what to do. And we don't think, as a peace activist, I think the Indian government has no policy towards Kashmir except that they want to rule it by gun, and that's what's going on this time. I have been a chairperson of Women's Commission. I have seen the human rights violations going on on a mass scale. But I don't think there is any policy. When there is no policy, you see unpredictability, you see uncertainty on the ground. So I think this is going worse, and the international community has to rise to the occasion and come to the rescue of Kashmiris.
But give me a sense of how this particular BJP government is different from the time that late Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, and when he spoke about dealing with Kashmir in the framework of humanity, insaniyat, as he put it. Do you think that there is a difference between then and now?
Well, when PDP went into an alliance with the BJP, it was the impression at that time that this is again the Vajpayee era. Well, Vajpayee didn't do anything much, but at least he had a human heart and he wanted to deal with Kashmir on the humanitarian basis. And the same aspirations and the same thinking was with the BJP, the PDP, sorry, that the BJP under the Narendra Modi government, they will just have the same thinking, same sort of a policy to deal with the Kashmir. But it didn't happen, and the situation went totally different, and it was altogether different. And PDP got realized that no, we have allied with the party that's not the same which it used to be the BJP. Modi has his own policies. Modi government works in its own way, and we are seeing in India how Muslims are being treated there. So I don't think Kashmiris now expect anything better from this government as far as the situation is going on.
Okay.
That's the reality we are facing.
Okay, stay with me. Let me just go to Faisal. Faisal, as a journalist, as someone who has been in the situation, who has analyzed the situation, who's talked about it, give me a sense, when we say that Delhi has no policy, Naima just said that, Sartaj Saab said that, Anuradha Bhasin said that, and right on this program, but even otherwise, we get a sense that Delhi has no policy. I think that Delhi has a policy in the sense that they have decided that they are going to use repressive methods to control the state and to put down the Kashmiris. Would you agree with me?
Well, first of all, it's surprising how people who are part of a government that has killed so many Kashmiris, I'm talking about PDP and BJP alliance, suddenly turn into peace activists when they're out of the job. Coming to your question, India has had a policy in Kashmir especially since 1989. That is of military occupation, and that is of repression, and that is of continued military crackdown on any form of dissent. That hasn't changed in the last 30 years. There is a policy there to basically to crack down on the will of Kashmiris who aspire for self-determination. You can see in the last 3 years, this year alone, 400 people have been killed, among them armed fighters. Last year, 200 rebels were killed. And the year before, there was 100. And then we know what happened in 2016 when the uprising happened. There is a policy, the policies of body count. They believe that the number of Kashmiris they will kill, they will be able to basically quash the whole uprising and end the whole this uprising against the Indian state for right to self-determination. But history and other countries where such insurgencies and uprisings have happened have always taught us that counterinsurgencies are a popularity contest. And since 1989, especially since 1989, we know who is the most popular in Kashmir and which side is the most popular. So there is determination in Kashmir to continue their demands for right to self-determination. And there's determination in the Indian government too to continue the military assault in Kashmir. The problem for the Indian establishment is that it's not enough for them. Like, they keep killing on Kashmiris, they keep killing on these Kashmiri armed rebels who are ill-trained and hardly have any weapons. It's not ending, and that's the problem for India. Like, do they talk to Kashmiris and see themselves as on a losing side? Because it will be a PR disaster for BJP since it's coming into elections in March. Recently, this former Norwegian Prime Minister, Mr. Bondevik, visited Hurriyat leadership, Mr. Gilani and Mirwais.
He was also here in Azad Kashmir, met with the Azad Kashmir president and said that the situation there is very dicey, very precarious, and the world needs to look into what's happening there.
Absolutely. I mean, this comes into light when the United Nations Human Rights Commission issued a report on Kashmir, which basically quantified that Kashmiris are demanding right to self-determination, and that basically ended this whole 30 years of propaganda that India has been doing on Kashmir, that there is nothing going on. So it was clear Mr. Bondevik's visit in Kashmir is seen as, some observers see that Indian government is trying to use this as a track 3 diplomacy, whereby they're trying to assess the mood of the Hurriyat leadership, which seem to have the upper hand right now, because recently in the local body elections, there was a 97% boycott. It's the highest in Kashmir's electoral history since 1951. So you can understand what the situation is. The people are determined. They will continue to demand their right to self-determination. But at the same time, India is caught between devil and the deep sea. Do they finally push the pedal to the metal and say, okay, we will stop killing you, or we will continue to do that? As you can see with the army chief's statement yesterday, when
the Indian Army chief.
Yeah, the Indian Army chief, who said that we could go for drone warfare in Kashmir if Indian people give their consent to that, to the collateral damage and the killings that they would do.
Yeah.
And I mean, this shows the frustration that they have, that despite killing so many armed fighters and civilians, bombing houses, and
they have still not been able to break the will. But tell me something, Faisal. You constantly mentioned the right to self-determination, which of course is absolutely correct. And it's also an inalienable right. In other words, this is a norm which cannot be compromised. But India constantly talks about terrorism. Now, Naima Majur, in her intervention, said that the children that are being killed, the boys that are being killed, aged from 12 to 14 to 15. Now, clearly these boys are not terrorists and they are not being sponsored by Pakistan. And yet, this narrative seems to sell in the outside world. Why is that?
I think this whole terrorist bogeyman that India has been raising since 9/11 is not working anymore. I mean, there is more acceptability towards insurgency movements in the world. As you can see in the Moro liberation movement in Philippines, the Taliban in Afghanistan are the United States is very keen on talking to them. And there are other insurgencies, even Al-Shabaab in Somalia, where people want to talk to these insurgent groups. The same is the case in Kashmir. I mean, India has been trying to make the Kashmir's indigenous movement seem like a terrorist movement, but it has constantly failed to do that. I mean, you can see that India has a better PR strategy than Kashmiris or Pakistan has over Kashmir. So
I'm going to come back to that, Faisal. I'm going to come back to that because that's an important point in terms of what the Kashmiri strategy is and also what Pakistan's policy is towards Kashmir. And I will seek to get your view on that. But let me go back to Naima Majur. Ms. Majur, tell me something. This entire coalition, which was the PDP-BJP coalition, and this was poles apart in terms of ideologies. And the PDP remained in government despite the excesses of the New Delhi government. And it got out of the job only when the governor dissolved the assembly. Do you think there will now be a sense within the PDP leadership that they were had, or that they got exploited and played, and that it was a mistake to be in a coalition with the BJP?
Well, I think this was a suicidal mission of PDP, to be honest with you, because two poles apart, two ideologies.
Faisal, what do you think? You think it was a mistake, or you think PDP tried in earnest to make it work, or perhaps be able to provide some kind of relief to the Kashmiris by being in a coalition with the BJP, or it was simply a matter of being in power?
I mean, Naeema Mahjoor, I mean, she was part of the PDP and she was part of the commission. And in 2016, she had a criminal silence until the BJP pulled the plug on the alliance, and now she is talking about peace in Kashmir. So coming to your question, I mean, it's a thing that in Kashmir since the 1980s that everyone knows that in Kashmir no government will survive without the active backing of New Delhi. And that's what PDP wanted. They wanted support of BJP to have a government. They could have gone with national conference, even if Umar Abdullah had said that we can. There is a possibility of you and us coming together, but they refused because they knew that they will have to, they will have to understand how the mood in Delhi is, and they cannot do anything that is against Delhi.
Okay,
so it's
Faisal, let me go back to Ms. Mahjoor because the line had dropped. Mahjoor, quickly, because I have to wrap up also, the same question about, do you think it was a mistake by the PDP
It
to
was.
have been in a...
I'm just telling you, it was a suicidal mission of PDP to go into alliance with the BJP because the two ideologies, they were never been to be on the same platform. And as Faisal was saying, yes, I was with PDP, and it was just an experiment to bring relief to the people, to have some sort of a relief where every day the killings were going on, but it didn't work. Yes, we are sorry, we have been there, but I am not a part of PDP anymore, neither I am a politician now. But as you say, in India, no government, I mean in Jammu and Kashmir, no government will survive without the support of Indian government, as is happening in the Pakistani administered Kashmir. So it is both way the same thing. We are not different. Yes, the violence is going on.
Well, considering that I belong to
fighting
Azad Kashmir, I think we need to make a distinction between Azad Kashmir and occupied Kashmir, because the Azad Kashmir, the Azad Kashmiris are well subsumed in Pakistan. But I don't want to make that contentious. I have to wrap up also, but I want to go back quickly to Faisal for a very simple question and a quick response. What should be the policy of the Kashmiris and what should be Pakistan's policy?
Well, you know, in Kashmir, the governments in Srinagar are called puppet governments by the people. So there is no sense of relief that comes having a government in Kashmir or not. It doesn't make sense because human rights violations have continued despite being different regimes. And PDP, I mean, according to a lot of analysts in Kashmir, is a front of BJP, and it's a party that was created by agencies.
Now it seems that Sajjad Loan has become the front for the BJP. But what should Pakistan's policy?
That's an existential threat for PDP now.
Yeah.
I mean, let me come back to your question on the policy of Kashmir and Pakistan. See, the problem in Kashmir is that the leadership is caged and they have basically no strategy but to continue resisting. And in Pakistan, the problem is that since 1990, I mean, I have read through all the history of Kashmir, especially vis-a-vis how Pakistan responded to. There has always been this claim that Pakistan has never had a policy on Kashmir, basically. It has rhetoric, which is based on United Nations resolutions, but there's no active policy.
But nothing beyond that. But nothing beyond that. Now, yeah, that's a very interesting point. That was all the time I have for this segment. Thank you so much, Ms. Naeema Mahjoor and Mohammad Faisal, speaking with us on our top story with reference to occupied Kashmir. We're going to take a short break, and at the other side of the break, we will discuss the rising tensions between Ukraine and Russia, and also between Russia and the United States. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Indus Special. Our second story is about rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine on the one hand, and Russia and the US on the other. While Trump has indicated that he mayn't meet with President Putin at the G20 summit on Saturday, reports suggest that Moscow has deployed the S-400 anti-access area denial system in Crimea. To get a background to the latest round of hostilities and where the situation might be headed, we have with us Ambassador Ashraf Jahangir Qazi and Ambassador Khalid Khattak. welcome and thank you to both. Let me just put this question first to Ambassador Kazi. How do you see the situation, sir? And let me just also add that very recently, one of the top US scholars, John Mearsheimer, has come up with a book. And one of the arguments that he makes is that when the US took NATO to the near abroad of Moscow, it did not realize that Moscow will have to retaliate. Do you think that this is some kind of retaliation now? The Russian populations in Crimea and eastern Ukraine and elsewhere, Moscow is reaching out to them and using them to foment trouble in these states, especially in this case, Ukraine?
Yes, that's a fair point to start with. You know, when the German unification took place, or rather the West German absorption of East Germany took place, the elder President Bush assured President, at that time, Gorbachev, that NATO would, that if he permitted the peaceful reunification of Germany, while the United Germany or reunited Germany joined NATO, NATO would not move 1 inch eastwards towards the Soviet Union or its former satellite countries. And then when Clinton succeeded President Bush Sr., he told Gorbachev, or at that time Yeltsin. that the Soviet Union was no more. Russians had been defeated in the Cold War, and that they could no longer sort of make these demands, especially since this demand was more verbal and there was no written document, but an undertaking had been taken. Putin never forgot that. At that time, Putin had not yet taken over, but Putin never forgot that this understanding with the West was so cynically tossed aside. After that, the Americans sought to bring in intermediate nuclear missiles, or claiming that they were aimed at Iran, but they were obviously going to fly over Russian territory. Then, of course, he sort of provoked situations in Georgia and also more recently, or since some time, in the Baltics. So this is part of a larger new game, which is now rising to the surface, you know, the greater game which is being played in the Eurasian theater. As far as Crimea is concerned, Crimea was given by Khrushchev to the Ukraine because Khrushchev was of Ukrainian descent himself, to commemorate a long forgotten battle that the Russians had. But that was within the Soviet Union, where it did not matter. When the Soviet broke up, they recognized Ukraine as a separate country, you know, on the basis of that agreement. But it was understood that Ukraine, which actually means the frontier, it was the first capital of Russia, Kiev Rus. Ukraine has never had an independent existence from Russia. And suddenly it sort of, because it is part divided between Russian Orthodox and Catholics, there is that divide running through them. And NATO and the United States played in those divisions and sought to bring about, and they did bring about, a fascist revolution in the Ukraine, and then engineered also a revolt in the eastern of the Donbass area, which is a Russian-dominated area. So Putin sees that this is a massive strategic challenge, which has pushed him into the arms of China, and therefore a new major realignment of major forces is taking place. And this is part of that particular struggle which is emerging on the world scene.
Ambassador Kazi, thank you for this excellent plinth that you have provided on which to further build the program. Ambassador Khattak was our ambassador to Moscow for a long time. Ambassador Khattak, I want you to give us a sense of how Moscow operates, and where do you think the situation now, because the situation in eastern Ukraine is extremely tense now with this holding of the vessels and the deployment of S-400 at Crimea. And of course, this brings in the United States into the picture and also US allies. Where do you think the situation is headed?
Well, first of all, I fully agree with Ambassador Ashraf Jahangir Qazi. In retrospect, it appears that the Cold War was not about containment of communism, but containment of Russia. And NATO eastwards expansion in the wake of the collapse of Soviet Union and the dismemberment of the Warsaw Pact just, proves that point. As for the situation right now is concerned, I think basically, Ukrainians backed by European Union and some elements even in the US are trying to test waters, are trying to test the will of.
Ambassador Kazi, the same question. I mean, going forward, obviously the US and its allies will have to do something about this, or at least they're saying they have to do something about it. And Trump has also threatened that he might not meet with President Putin on the sidelines of G20 on Saturday. Do you think, Moscow is now upping the ante?
Well, I think I couldn't understand Khalid also because of the poor reception, but I think I got the sense of what he was saying, that Ukraine is testing the waters to try and see Moscow's reaction. And Moscow has reacted very quickly, very strongly to this provocation. Of course, there's debate about where the exact location was. Was it in international waters or in Russian waters or Ukrainian waters? Because that Sea of Azov is a contested area in many ways, although they have an agreement, covering, movements of, naval vessels, etc. And they have an agreement which covers commercial sort of communications. But nonetheless, if you put it in the context of the emerging new greater game, Eurasian-based greater game, and the government in Kiev is completely, on the side of the West and the NATO countries. I don't think Russia is looking for escalating tension unnecessarily, but it cannot allow its credibility to be undermined. So it's a question of what the next phase is. Now they meet. There's this meeting, the G20 meeting. It's very interesting to see. Trump has not formally condemned Russia. However, the Pentagon.
But he has talked about the aggression, and he says, and he tweeted, and he doesn't like this aggression.
That's right. He's under pressure from his own people. His own UN permanent representative, Nikki Haley, has condemned it in no uncertain terms. The Pentagon, the State Department, but not Trump. Now that once again gives rise to all the usual sort of speculation about Trump and Russia or Trump and Putin. And whether Trump now is a weakening president as a result of the domestic situation, the Mueller investigation, etc., in which case, America is very concerned, particularly about China, and even more about the China-Russian de facto alliance vis-a-vis America, because both of them see America very, very aggressive.
That's a very interesting point.
It is that Moscow was escalating. I think Moscow doesn't want the situation to escalate, but it does need to maintain its credibility in the face of Ukrainian provocation at the behest of whoever is encouraging them to do this. Moscow has to retain. I don't think Moscow is looking for war. They've actually played their cards very smartly. They defend their position very firmly, very firmly, and they will use kinetic power if that is necessary. So the question now is, when they meet, if they do meet, if Trump doesn't meet Putin, then Trump is almost signaling the weakening of his presidency as a result of his domestic situation. That then will change the paradigm of American foreign policy, because he's sought to take so many initiatives and all. And the one decent initiative that he had, because most of the other initiatives that he's taken have been, to put it mildly, beyond comprehension. His trade wars and his policy towards Mexico and Canada and Europe and everybody else have sort of defied logic. But his one recent policy has been to seek a rapprochement with Russia. And that is the policy which is being opposed by the intelligence agencies, the military, and the others.
This is a very interesting insight. Give me a sense of, are you saying that while Trump wants to do certain things, the traditional establishment in the United States is throwing a spanner in the works?
Very much so. After all, look at all of this stuff with regard to alleged Russian intervention in the American election. To this day, they have made arrests. They have called people liars and probably sentenced them, and they will be in jail and all. But not a single shred of evidence has been produced to back the allegations that the Russians were able to influence the outcome in the American elections.
There is a kind of consensus among people who deal with these technical issues, especially cyber issues and the use of the social media and the platform, that the Russians did have some means of influencing that. But of course, the jury is out on that. We've got Ambassador Khattak back with us. Ambassador Khattak, just give me a sense that you think that the Moscow is testing the waters, and if it does not beget a reaction from the US, outside obviously of just the rhetoric, that then there will be other smaller states at the danger, at the mercy of Moscow. I'm talking about Belarus is already within Moscow's sphere, but then there's Moldova, there's Latvia, there's Lithuania. You think the bear is going to march towards these states also?
Well, to be honest about it, you know, the historical and geographical, connections and ties between Russia and these countries are so deep and so close that, any strategy or any policy which defies, those, ties, is not likely to work. So there has to be some kind of a modus vivendi. There has to be some kind of a middle ground, which is both acceptable to Moscow and to these countries. Secondly, as far as the current crisis is concerned, it has two aspects. One relates to the internal situation in Ukraine, where you see a pro-Moscow oligarch has been replaced by a pro-European Union oligarch. I mean, the so-called Maidan revolution, etc., was all about the regime change and nothing else. The second part is, of course, you see that some Ukrainians, known for their, nationalistic views, and historically speaking, they supported even Nazi Germany during the German occupation during the Second World War, for that parts of, Russia. So, they are also, part of the problem. Now, when it comes to Crimea is 70 to 80%, of Russian origin. The Crimeans are of Russian origin, 14% are Turks, and Ukrainians are 5 or 6%.
Yeah.
So this was, I think, basically, a kind of a testing of Russia's control over Crimea or Crimea's accession to Russia. So,
well, the world rejected the referendum. The world rejected that referendum, saying that it was something that was done at gunpoint.
Yeah, listen, geography. You see, Azov is not exactly a sea; it's a kind of a huge lake. It's a kind of a, it's a similarly, it's a, and the movement of these Ukrainian ships in these waters was basically to test. You see, the Russia's control over these waters, or Russia's, or the fact of, Crimea's accession, of which the West calls annexation,
So where do you think the situation is headed now?
Sorry?
Where do you think the situation is headed now?
It's not going to head to any kind of a major conflagration or conflict. In fact, you see, European Union and Europe cannot afford to have, a major confrontation with Russia, and also it is not Russia's interest to have a major confrontation with.
But do you think there will be another round of sanctions against Moscow?
Both have the Bismarckian principle. The Bismarckian, policy. That policy was that Germany and Russia cannot afford to go to war with each other because it's going to lead to the destruction of both, and the decline of both.
But do you think there's going to be another round of sanctions against Russia following this?
Sanctions, when it comes to, this sanctions, diplomacy, it's basically, use of a trade as an instrument of war, and sanctions don't impact, the policy makers or the leadership of a country. Sanctions impact the people of that country. And I don't think, you see, that this new round of sanctions by European Union is going to make a huge difference for Russia.
Okay. Thank you so much. Ambassador Khalid Khattak was speaking with us on this issue of Ukraine. Let me go back to Ambassador Kazi on this. Same question, sir, about the sanctions. And you also know that the US is not particularly happy that the Germans are not prepared to not get their gas from Russia. So do you think another round of sanctions will actually bite?
Well, sanctions, America unfortunately has this inclination to impose sanctions very quickly, even though often they're counterproductive, as indeed is the case with China, which is feeding now into the prices of cars, through the impact on the prices of imports of inputs for American manufacturers and sending the price up. Now, with regard to Russia, they've already imposed quite a lot of sanctions on it. The Russians, when it comes to, Russian dignity or Russian image and all, and Russian poverty becomes an asset there because these people are used to putting up with very tough conditions, particularly when they think Mother Russia is being threatened by an outside power. So, and the interesting thing is that Putin has not lost any of his popularity, despite the difficult economic conditions. So I don't think America will be able to achieve its purposes through extra sanctions, although it will certainly bite even deeper into the living standards of the Russians, but bringing them to their knees is not an option, since Russia today is militarily stronger than the Soviet Union ever was. Ultimately, its economy is
but its economy is dwindling. Its population is deteriorating.
Its economy is its weak point.
Yeah.
But that is a longer-term thing. In the meantime, in any particular scenario, to try and bring the Soviet Union down to its knees is going to risk a very aggressive Soviet response, Russian response, at a time when the Russians are militarily extraordinarily strong. The Russians claim to have even developed a first strike capability vis-a-vis the United States. I don't know how much truth there is in that, but they have made that claim, and which means that
they are going into hypersonic missiles, and their S-400 system, which they have deployed to Ukraine, is clearly, as far as reports are concerned, the most state-of-the-art system and much better than the US Patriot and also the Theater High Altitude Air Defense System that the US has. But thank you so much. Ambassador Kazi was talking to us about Ukraine-Russian tensions and also rising tensions between Russia and the United States. It remains to be seen how Moscow will play this, whether the vessels that it has captured will be released, or whether Moscow is simply trying to push the envelope to see how much pressure it can build on Ukraine and also by extension on the United States. This was all for today from Indus Special. We shall see you tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.